unit is the most insane bananas group. Hugely entertaining.
We did get away with attempted murder. I brought this up when we did it, that we dumped gasoline on Ray Horace. I think it was Jimmy Yuta, and I think Jason Cade maybe was the third guy, or Myron Reed. And all I could think was, man, we just committed a felony in front of like 500 people and police officers. And I think MLW fined us, and it was like, man, that is you're not giving us any motivation to behave. Like we attempted to commit like an actual serious felony. That's immolation is not a minor crime. You know, trying to burn someone alive is a pretty serious deal.
But when it comes to street cred, I mean, you've bought it and then some.
I suppose.
It seems to play so well into Bloodsport. What I loved in watching in Bloodsport is it's so obvious the command of this, the art of wrestling, the hardest part of wrestling, the sub holds, which then to make that last like 20 minutes or however long, it seems like forever. It looks like absolute excruciating pain, and just I don't know how you don't just give up from being completely exhausted.
If you've ever, it's honestly the weird thing that people don't understand about the wrestling aspect of wrestling, because they'll always say, there are people who will say that, you know, the entertainment aspect's the hard stuff, the wrestling is easy. There are people who say the wrestling is the hard stuff, the entertainment's easy. The reality is, so anything you don't work on is hard. The reason a lot of people struggle with the grappling aspect of professional wrestling is because they don't train for it. They try to do the bare minimum to get through a match, and they don't understand that if you focus and train on that style, it is not necessarily easy, but it will be more natural to you. You'll be able to slip into that mode a lot easier than if you were doing any sort of other match type. Again, if you put someone whose only experience in fighting is, you know, brawling at the local high school parking lot after school against a UFC fighter is going to kill him every time.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily about size or strength or athleticism. It's about one of these guys just trained to do this and understands what they're doing, and one of these guys hasn't. And you're always going to I mean, I'll freely admit, I cannot draw to save my life. I cannot draw anything. I actually have a handwriting disorder. But my brother, he can draw wonderfully, but you know why he can do that? Because he practiced at it. He actually put in the effort, and he learned, and he developed his skill set. So it's just like anything, you just have to develop the skill.
So are you thinking about, like, at some point trying to develop the drawing portion of your wrestling game?
No. Absolutely. I am probably happier than anyone that there are no audiences at these shows. I have never been happier to wrestle. As someone who's been watching wrestling for 30 years, I started watching wrestling, and well, I've got more than that now. I don't like to think about it. Yeah, 35 years. I started watching wrestling when I was 3. I will say hands down, as a wrestling fans are the worst. We are the worst people on earth. We're terrible. If you ever want to have fun, you can go on Twitter in any political thread, find the worst take someone has said, and there's a 95% chance if you go to their profile, huge wrestling fan. I don't know why. It's the weirdest thing, but it's like every time it'll be like this guy's saying, yeah, just burn everyone in Israel and Palestine. Fuck them all. And then you'll go to their page and they're wearing like a CM Punk shirt. And you're like, I don't know that Punk would co-sign that. That's like in the Middle East. I don't feel like he's on board with that.
You know what? I think it's any fan culture, because like I love wrestling. Yeah, some of the fans are terrible. I love metal. I hate saying that because so many metal fans are terrible. Or like Rick and Morty. Like, I like the show. I have to stop telling people that I like it because the fan base is terrible.
Well,
it's this is my logic. Whenever anything becomes your personality, that's the issue. When you're defining yourself by your fandom, when that's the thing that makes you whole and how you explain who you are to people, that's usually when that happens. I only ever give a little bit more. I only put a little bit more pressure on wrestling fans because I have to deal with them as part of my job, and I am one.
Fair.
And then the other aspect of it, and it's a kind of a weird one, wrestling fans genuinely believe they can behave poorly and then just pass it off as, oh, bro, I was giving you heat. It's okay.
Mhm.
You'll never see a Star Wars fan straight up call someone the N-word to their face because they didn't like Last Jedi. And I've absolutely seen wrestling fans do that recently, like within the last 2 years.
Jesus.
And then there's their defense is, bro, I was just giving him heat. He's a heel.
God, no.
Yeah, I don't know if
That's not okay.
kayfabe. I don't know if kayfabe goes that way.
Yes, you don't. There's no triple kayfabe. You're not allowed to do that. That's. But again, it's this weird line where they believe that this, and that's why I joke. I'm like, no one appreciates a no fan show more than me. And at least now when I'm working one, it's intentional. It's not just because it didn't draw well.
So what does your experience of the show day become when it is like, and especially when it goes to such an extreme as Bloodsport, like where there were like 2 cameramen, there must have been single digits people in the room. Like what kind of experience is that?
There's probably about a total of 5 people in the room between the because there's the hard cam is just static. There's not even anyone manning it. And then you have 2 floor cams and the wrestlers and the ref. So about 5 people are in the room at any given point in time. But it also allows you to focus a lot more, which is helpful because something anyone who's ever taken part in any sort of competitive fighting can tell you is that there is an aspect of wanting to sort of have tunnel vision on what you're doing. You want to focus 100% on the fight and on what's going on with your opponent, which is definitely an added bonus of the no fan shows because you're not having your attention drawn any which direction. There's nothing worse than the idea that you just lost position or you just fell victim to some sort of attack because you heard something out of the right side of your ear that wait, what? And it just caught your attention for that split. I almost died at the gym last week.
What?
On a box jump because I lost my focus for 1 second.
Oh my God.
1 split second. I had a bench behind the box. So I lost my focus. I don't even know what I thought about, but something popped in my head like, what am I going to do for dinner tonight? Just a split second. Box kicked out from under me. Yeah. But the box
Broccoli
kicked out from under me.
again.
Right? I hit the bridge of my nose on the bench.
Oh my God.
Oh no.
I was feeling in my hands for a second. I actually had to go to the chiropractor yesterday. He checked my neck. He was like, yeah, you're fine. But he could definitely feel where it was all knotted up. He's like, good thing you have a strong neck. Otherwise, you might have.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And you'd think, again, the similar thing can happen in any match is that if you lose your focus for even a second, if you start to wonder about what you're going to have for dinner, or if you left the stove on, or when was the last time you cleaned your wrestling shoe, like anything, you can, like that, you'll just wind up in a bad spot. It's the worst feeling in the world. So the environment actually limits that. It's really nice.
Does it alter like creative decisions that might happen where you don't have an audience telling you what they're wanting to see, and therefore you have to use your judgment?
I'm a big believer in have a game plan and stick to it. I think personal opinion, and this is just a fandom thing. I'm a big believer that if an audience member suggests something, anything, no matter how good the idea is, you can't do it. Because the second you do that, you're telling them that their opinion is more important than the opinion of the people who are writing the show or the people who are the actors, like anything like that. I feel like you have to kind of ignore your audience. As much as people say that's the opposite of what's true, the reason I take that stance is it starts to take the enjoyment out of it for them as well. They don't realize it. But if you go to a restaurant and you might order a meal and you might say, hey, I want my steak medium rare. Okay, I'll give you your steak medium rare, but I'm not going to have you come back and choose your cut of meat and watch me cook and tell me how to cook it.
Yeah, that's a very
You understand, like you ordered your steak by coming to the specific show. That's you ordering your steak how you want it done.
Mm-hmm.
The second you say, maybe you should use a little bit more garlic on that, or maybe I don't really like onion, or I don't really like sage. Like, no. I'm a chef. I'm cooking. You have to trust I know what I'm doing. Yeah. Otherwise, you shouldn't have me making your meal. In the same way, if you don't want to watch me wrestle, I actually had a kid one time come up to me at this was at All In actually, or at Starcast. It's the first All In, I was there for Dark Light Clothing, which is a wonderful company run by a very nice woman named Amy. And they just brought me out to sort of work their table and everything. It was fun. This kid came with me. He was maybe 13, 14 years old. And he tells me, yeah, I'm a really big fan of yours, but I think you should work faster paced matches. I think you really need. And I'm just sitting there like nodding my head and listening to him and going, He didn't buy anything either.
Oh
He did
no!
not buy
Oh
anything.
no!
Buy the
Talked to
shirt
me for about
then.
15 minutes telling me what he thinks I should do. And all I'm thinking is, yeah, you know what? You tell that to freaking Eric Hammer or Cal Jack or somebody who's trying to throw me into a wall.
No shit.
I should try going faster. Then that would really no, dude. I've got my own headaches to deal with. I've got my own challenges.
This is a thing that as a comedian, I've had difficulty trying to wrap my head around Twitch or live streaming, because it feels like and different comedians have different ideas. Some people just like to work a room and do audience interaction or whatever. But you've written down these jokes, you've worked on these jokes, versus in that streaming space, you're supposed to interact with people and you're supposed to give them what they want. And I can't get into it. I it doesn't click with me, and I'm wondering if that is how you are, or how wrestlers are, or is there that?
It varies person to person, but I think it's just like any comedian. There's a lot of comedians traditionally have had a good mix of, and pro wrestling and comedy have a weird. There's a lot of weird parallels.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
I watched the. I not everyone agrees with me on this. I really like Pete Holmes. I used to watch his Batman sketches when he was on College Humor. Which actually, fun fact, Ryan Katz, who works for WWE now, and used to work for XPW as well as Wrestling Society X. He was actually a stunt double for Patton Oswalt in one of those. He's the hands. They're doing the close-up. Him cutting his hands free. But the show Crashing, there were too many things in that show that I've experienced. There were too many times I was like, oh no, I know that guy. The old veteran who keeps telling you that you got to go out there and grind. You got to be doing shows and you got to be driving and all this stuff that I've heard. And I was like, no, you're not a pro wrestler. You shouldn't have experienced this. We shouldn't experience this. And you guys definitely shouldn't. But traditionally with stand-up comedians, the good ones know how to balance. If you look at someone like Rodney Dangerfield, who was probably the last real one-liner comedian that was popular, he would tell a joke, and if it didn't get the reaction he wanted from everybody, he'd call that person out, and he'd do a little bit with them for a second, he'd move on. He'd let them feel recognized. They'd get more into it. They'd be more relaxed, or they'd at least feel shame and not want to take away from the show anymore.
They'd always say, but you're all right.
Oh no, what was it? He had one where he literally he says something, you just hear him go, these are called jokes, sweetie. It's what the show's gonna be made up of. And he just stops to call out one woman who's not laughing. He has no other reason to do it. He's like, no, you're not laughing? Okay, well, let me explain to you. This is a stand-up show. I'm doing jokes. That's what we're doing here.
Do you in the course of a match or an event feel like a similar call to try to neutralize somebody that you're getting interaction with? Does that happen?
I did when I was younger, and I still do on occasion, but not as much anymore. The last time I really did, I was actually wrestling Tom Lawler in Portland. I think it was Portland. It may have been Seattle. I can't remember. It was Oregon or Seattle. So someone yelled something. I don't know what it was. I don't know what this guy said, but I was in no mood for it. And I turned around, got in his face, and I yelled, I will fuck you so hard, you will call me daddy. And he very quickly sat down and got quiet. He was not comfortable with that statement. So there was.
Why wouldn't he be?
Well, it was a very angry way of saying it. I think that was a real issue. It wasn't romantic, or I wasn't trying to charm him. I was clearly this was a very prison reaction. Mind you, that was not the best one of the night. The best one actually was backstage. Because Chavo Guerrero and Super Crazy were on later in the night. And earlier in the night were TJP and Juventud. And Juvi starts getting Eddie Guerrero chants on a show with Chavo. because he's doing a lot of Eddie's moves. So across the locker room, I just hear Super Crazy yell, Chavo! Chavo! What the fuck, man? What the fuck? And Chavo's just like, Tubi, I don't know what to say. Like that, yeah. Like, I'm not mad. I would have expected nothing less. But yeah, no, I when I was younger, I used to be really about like if someone in the crowd is, I feel like they're taking away from the match, they're taking away the focus, I'll get in their face. But as I've gotten older, I've realized there's no winning that argument because you can only insult someone on their level, you can't insult someone on yours. So I could deliver the sickest burn in the world. If that guy doesn't respect me, he'll just keep yelling.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
So I got to the point where I just ignore them. Just ignore them, move on. Because if they don't get any reaction for it, sooner or later they'll just shut up.
Yeah. How do you feel about? I'm excited to see how wrestling is now starting to kind of mesh worlds. Like we're normally an AEW podcast, we cover that particular promotion, but a lot of those wrestlers are now doing spots and other things, or they had in the past. Before they came over to AEW. And so they're just sort of marrying these worlds and bringing wrestling fans that normally wouldn't watch or know about some of this stuff. How does that make you feel? Because honestly, it seems like such a rich environment to bring in way more talent,
Well, the issue with AEW, and this is just a general issue I think they had, they've gotten away from it. They've corrected it a lot more lately over the last like maybe 6 months to a year. They signed a bunch of what were basically main event guys, and they were trying to fill out a card with everyone having a main event match. If you go back to like look at early AEW, a lot of these matches that would have been very big money draws that people would have paid a lot of money to see, Pentagon versus Kenny Omega, Jericho versus MJF. I'm not even sure. Like I'm just throwing out names together of people I know. But it was one of those deals where they burned through a lot of these matches because the company came together so quickly that they didn't really know how to structure a show to get the most out of it. Mm-hmm. So with time, and when they started doing Dark, it helped a lot. They started bringing in people like Willie Hobbs, Ricky Starks, Brian Cage, people who could fill in these other roles, mid-card stuff. Their women's division suffered a lot because they were very heavily relying on the Japanese talent. And then when COVID hit, it was basically a year of half your rosters just not there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think they started finding that's why they started hiring people, obviously, that were more local to Florida because it became apparent that
they needed it.
Yeah, they need bodies. At the end of the day, the first thing you need to run a wrestling show is live bodies. That's the most important thing. Talent comes second. Because
apparently
I could have the single most talented wrestler in the world, but if I've only got one person, they can't have a match by themselves.
But apparently if Contra Unit is around, some dead bodies might happen too.
No, you can never prove that. We've never been connected. I still want to know where Armada is. I demand to know that every taping. Because if you actually look, Contra is an acronym, and the last letter of the A is Armada. And to the best of my knowledge, we've never had a boat. No boats. I did jokingly.
Wrestling Armada.
Well, it's like the Coalition something Armada. I think they just were trying to end with an A. My whole logic is still I want it to be like Rod Torfelson's Armada featuring Herman Menderchuk from Kids Hall. So I want it to be like Joseph Samael's Armada featuring Jacob Fatu.
You definitely have to do the thing like they say maybe happened in ancient Rome where they like flooded the amphitheater to have naval battles like in the Colosseum. Do that with one of your arenas.
I honestly the at least one of them is run by the Russian mob, so I don't think we're gonna be allowed to do that. They were very specific, no blood on the floor. They were very specific about that, and I was like, yeah, I'm sure you guys don't want the cops coming in here with probable cause. Yeah, I get it. A nightclub owned by Russians. I wouldn't want them coming in either.
Well, you get ants. You don't want that.
Oh, ants I can deal with. I can't deal with them finding friggin' Yuri's missing arm that's been under the couch for 6 months. That's what I'm worried about.
That's what that smell is.
You know, Yuri
It's
knows
not
what he did.
concessions.
He does. But that's clean up after yourself. That's all they want.
But like that's is like is that like an interesting like newer thing of there being a lot of cross promotion like moves happening of people coming over for an event or for a stint.
That's not really new. That was actually right early on. That was very common with AEW. Same thing with AEW, Impact, MLW. A couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, we're sharing a lot of talent. There's a lot of the same people moving back and forth between. You had MJF, who was all over all three for a while. Sami Callihan, Young Bucks, Pentagon, and Phoenix were everywhere. I think they wrestled that last Mania in New York. I think they wrestled something like 15 shows in 3 days.
My God.
Yeah, no, it was pretty crazy. Like they were what was it? I think it was they were wrestling a show and they had to leave during the show to go to the next show because they had the match were so close together. But they were also getting $1,500 a show, so they probably walked out of there with like 45 grand.
Did they bother to get a hotel room or did they
probably not? Oh no, they're those guys are pirates, man. They will go nonstop. Like it's impressive. I'm like, yeah, man, give me a hotel room. Let me take a shower between matches. Let me be clean and have clean gear. So I'm not like giving everyone, 8 degrees of MERS or star or not MERS.
MRSA.
Staff. Yeah, MERS. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, when I was young, I was a straight scumbag. I would do the whole, wrestle, get changed, not even change your underwear or socks, like the same ones you wrestled in and showed up in. Just throw your pants on and then drive home. Maybe shower the next. Yeah, no, it was gross.
Do you think maybe you were quicker to confront like unruly people in the crowd because you were just so irritable from being all itchy?
I think in general I'm an irritable person. I used to be a lot worse. I actually I said at Bloodsport in with I think it was 5 or 6. I said it to Nolan Edward because he's legitimately an orphan. He is from the foster care system.
I've been wondering about that.
Yeah, that's not a joke. He legitimately grew up in orphanages.
Shit. Okay.
But I joked he's the only one who's allowed to ask me questions in airports. Now I say this because generally when I'm in an airport, if anyone says something to me, my response is, "Are you an orphan?" And they usually look at me like I'm crazy for a second. I say, "Are you an orphan?" Yeah. Do you have parents? And they go, "Yes." And I say, "Did they ever tell you to not talk to strangers?" And I let that sit for a second, and then I turn back to whatever I'm doing.
Oh my God.
And because I'm very irritable in airports. It's a stress thing. I have to make a plane. I've missed planes before by minutes. I've missed planes by hours. I hate to do it. It's like, this is part of my job, is being able to make a flight and get there on time. So it's always very stressful for me to even be anywhere near an airport. If you hear a story about me being a jerk, there's a 99% chance it was in an airport.
Yeah, I'm a ball of nerves going to an airport. Although when I make orphan jokes, it's when I'm extremely hyper. I remember once in class in high school, I said to the girl that sat in front of me, "Your mom told me you're adopted." Just some stupid thing that my brother used to say to me all the time. And I was really hyper. I don't know. And she's like, "How do you know my mom?" And I was like, "Oh, fuck." She's really adopted. So that backfired. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah, it's the, again, bring up Kids in the Hall. They did a whole bit about that where the Kevin McDonald, he keeps meeting his wife's various coworkers and friends, and every time he's like, "What, are you deaf?" And it turns out the guy's actually hearing impaired. "Oh, what's the matter? What, you got what? Cat got your tongue?" Something like he's got the duct tape over his mouth. It turns out the guy has just been held hostage and he has a heart attack because of it.
I know you mentioned in some other interview, Kids in the Hall. I was like, "Oh, this guy must be a mega fan," and I don't know that much, but one The one I can really think of is the one where everybody is like the regional nickname thing, like
Oh
the
yeah, the Cincinnati Kid.
Cincinnati Kid. Yeah.
He's gonna fight the Toronto Kid.
and like it ends in the best way because like the Toronto Kid has a kid. Now he's the Toronto Kid or whatever it is. Oh man.
Who
Oh, yeah.
who was like when you first started wrestling, who did you look up to, and has that changed? I guess, like to emulate, because it feels like you're doing something different now than you used to.
Well, it sort of. I wouldn't say I'm doing something different as much as I've distilled what I do now. For perspective, I started wrestling in 2001. I tend to have to explain to people that I'm a lot older than they realize. I'm 38. I started wrestling before YouTube and 9/11 had happened.
Both big.
Legitimately, we had this, like, we canceled training because we had 9/11 happened, and we came in the next day, and it was one of those, okay, everyone okay? Anyone have anything they need to talk about? All right, well, fuck these guys up if we ever see them. Back to work. That's all it was. It was pretty brief. But at the time I started wrestling, I had a resurgence of interest over the few previous years. And I'd actually gotten really into ECW, and I was absolutely enamored with Sabu at the time, because the guy was just a train wreck. Every time you saw him, it was like watching a live action car crash. It was, even people who didn't like wrestling, I would show them to, and they'd be like, geez, this guy's insane. And that was where I was at when I started training. And as I started training, I started getting more into the technical aspect of wrestling. People like Keiji Muto, Mitsuharu Misawa, a lot of Kobashi, Kawada, a lot of the Japanese guys, that became sort of the thing I was really into. And the more I got into it, the more I started using skills I had. I had a martial arts background, but it was just something I didn't really use in pro wrestling at first. But the more I started seeing these guys doing their stuff, the more I was like, well, maybe I could use this thing I know instead of just relying on the pro wrestling techniques I'm being taught. And I mean, someone even pointed out the flying armbar I do, that or a couple of the armbars I do, actually, the flying armbar as well as the Oklahoma roll one. Both those, my buddy of mine, he's like, dude, I remember you doing that stuff in 2008. And and then he sees me doing it on TV with WWE in like 2014, 2015. And people were asking, oh, where did you learn that? I'm like, he was doing it 8 years ago, 6 years ago. Just no one ever saw it on TV. It's like, yeah, a lot of the time it was because you're getting so much. One of the problems with WWE is that you have so many people telling you what they think you should be doing, that sometimes you're trying to please too many people and you're not thinking about what you want to do. So as I've gotten older and as I've gotten away from that system more and more, I've more distilled what I'm doing and what I like to do. A lot of that actually has to do with my matches with Tom Lawler, because he was the first guy I wrestled who really allowed me to go full out. I didn't have to hold back. I didn't have to go half speed. I didn't have to, don't do these holds because, I want this guy to look good. You're a lot of like, no, Tom is a professional fighter. Tom's going to make you work, and you have to go out there and give your all with him or you're going to get eaten alive.
Yeah, he seems like a guy it's hard to overwhelm.
He is. You wouldn't think it either, because he's so relaxed. Like, he's the nicest guy in the world, but he's absolutely a beast. Like, he's someone who he'll go. I've seen this man lick beer off a floor in a bar.
Oh boy, filthy Tom Lawler indeed.
Oh, he earns the nickname. I've heard some stories. This was before I wrestled him. The MMA school I was training at down here in Orlando, the Jungle, he actually used to be one of the owners of. So the guys who run the place, Seth Petrozelli, who you might know from his knockout over Kimbo Slice. The Elite, basically the guy who ended Elite XC because they were building Elite XC around Kimbo Slice, and Seth gets in there and knocks him out in like 15 seconds as an alternate. He was a last minute alternate.
Yeah.
Oh,
destroyed Kimbo.
Yeah, Kimbo burned bright.
Yeah. But because of that, they actually all knew Tom, and they were like, oh yeah, we know Tom Lawler. And so I've heard a bunch of stories about him when he was younger too. They're pretty hilarious. But again, Tom brought a lot of that out of me, and I started realizing more and more of the stuff I knew. I mean, I even tell people they'll ask me, who do you watch in pro wrestling now? And just to give an example of how I moved on, like I watch guys like Minoru Suzuki, Minoru Tanaka, Hideki Suzuki, Masakatsu Funaki, like a lot of the guys who were in Pancrase or Fujiwara Gumi or UWFI, because stylistically, that's the stuff I really enjoy. But when I'm studying, I'll spend way more time watching, Yoshiaki Fujiwara videos where he's teaching how to do the armbar properly, or I'm watching Yuka Miyamoto videos where he's showing you how you do a double wrist lock, or Sakuraba, and all these guys, all the catch wrestlers, because I realized that's what pro wrestling was at its root.
Mm-hmm.
It was legitimate technique being demonstrated in a free-form environment.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that gets lost in the translation. And just bringing it back to Teresa's question about who inspired me. Again, I went from where I was really into guys like Sabu, these hardcore deathmatch guys flying all over the place, to where I wanted to see the guys who I knew if you put them in any environment, they could go. I mean, you're not going to tell a guy like Gary Albright to, Gary Albright ain't going to give you some Memphis out there. Gary Albright was a machine. He was a killer. I'd heard legend. Part of the reason he wore the singlet is because he'd been stabbed and he had a huge scar on his abdomen.
Oh my!
But yeah, no, dude was rough. Like, you're rough when you can hang with Samoans. Like, Samoans, they roll deep. So when you're rolling with them as family, yeah, when you're an oos, you've got it.
Oh boy, yeah. It seems like it's such an insanely natural thing for you to have come to Bloodsport and to have come to someone like Josh Barnett, who talked about, like, I hired these guys because I think they're good and I want them to do their thing, and it's this purity of the sport.
Did Josh ever tell you how he knew who I was at first?
No.
But he does say that it's really hard to find people that can do this style of wrestling.
It is. It's one of the someone actually asked when we were promoting 4 and 5 why there were no women's matches, and I had to point out, I was like, well, Lindsay Snow is having knee surgery, Layla Hirsch and a couple other people, they had like Impact and AEW commitments. I was like, and it's not easy to find men who have these credentials. It's also equally, if not more so, difficult to find women who have the credentials and can work in that environment. And there are some out there, but again, when it's so last minute, because those two events actually came together very quickly. I don't think people realize how quickly they were put together. But moreover, when I was in WWE, I used to interact a lot more on Twitter because it was just a way to build a following. One of the questions I'd get a lot was, who do you want to wrestle? What's your dream match at WrestleMania? And I'd say, I want to face Josh Barnett at WrestleMania. and he'd never heard of me, and he started looking into me, and we talked a few times, and he realized I was actually cool, and that I wasn't just some putz that was trying to pick a fight. I'm like, no, my thought is, get you a WrestleMania payday. Am I going to get destroyed? Absolutely, but I'll get destroyed on WrestleMania with former UFC heavyweight champion Josh Barnett. Like that's the Floyd Mayweather Big Show fight all over again. It's like, yeah. Am I winning? No, but I'm getting a huge payday, and they're going to talk about it forever. So why not?
Yeah, why indeed?
And then when Bloodsport came together, when I found out he was promoting it, I just messaged him and I was like, dude, I don't know if this is all you or if this is GCW, but I'm 100% in on this if you're willing to have me. And he was, and thankfully I've been able to do 5 events since then, so I'm very happy about that.
Your events are some of my favorites out of what we've seen, just from the technical aspect, almost the technical aspect alone. Because as someone like myself, I hadn't seen that type of wrestling before. I'm used to TV wrestling and all the flourishes, not the actual insanity that is this grappling.
I try to explain this again. One of the most interesting things you'll ever see is Russian Sambo, which is a combination of judo, jiu-jitsu, and catch wrestling that was developed post-World War II in the Soviet Union. Oh. And these guys, it's like someone took a gorilla, taught it 3 wrestling moves, and unleashed it on a human being. Like, these guys are insane. And the number of throws and takedowns, submissions they can pull off out of nowhere. If you're familiar with Volkan, who took part in UWFI, the guy could leg lock you from anywhere. He would come at you with the most ridiculous looking takedown, and he would somehow leg lock you out of it. The guy is, and he's like 60 years old now. He can still do all this stuff.
Oh my God.
But a lot, again, stylistically, it's sometimes hard for people to understand because they really have to focus. And it's why if you actually watch the Bloodsport events when there was an audience, you'll notice the audience is actually quiet for a lot of time, not because they're bored, but because they're really like paying attention. They're like getting close, like, oh,
counter to counter to counter to counter. And it's like, how the fuck did they counter that? Just the previous counter, it's just like keeps going and building.
Leverage.
I just realized
leverage the technique.
Is that where the Japanese audience thing comes from? Because like I know that they're usually quiet during a match. I'm like, but like didn't pro wrestling over there kind of start with work shoot kind of stuff?
Well, all pro wrestling at its core was, what you have to remember is that professional wrestling at its core started as a sport. It was competitive sport. And then what you started having was, initially, it actually wasn't even worked. It was fixed. And the easiest way to have a legitimate looking fixed fight is, I know how you're beating me and you know how you're beating me. And that's it. And we'll do whatever we're going to do up until then. But when it's time to go home, you're beating me with that. And that's what we're doing.
And then I know.
And not, exactly. And then, but again, as that started developing more into the working aspect that a lot of guys started doing, you saw a lot of technique devolve and in some cases fall by the wayside altogether. And so in a way, when people talk about old school wrestling, they'll oftentimes throw out, like 70s or 80s NWA or or stuff you see wrestling at the Chase or Madison Square Garden wrestling from the 60s and 70s. And while you do still see some aspects of it, because guys who were trained in catch wrestling, who were actual amateur wrestlers, Stu Hart was an Olympian. I think he was an Olympic alternate, actually. Same thing with Vern Gagne in wrestling. So like these guys knew their stuff. And you see that. But as you start to get into the 80s and the 90s, you're seeing more and more people who never had these experiences or this training. And they're just learning how to do a pro wrestling match. They're learning how to get through a pro wrestling match. Mitsuharu Misawa, who's one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, he got into amateur wrestling specifically because he wanted to be a pro wrestler. And he actually took the top honor, the national title in Japan, I think it was 185 in freestyle. And the same year, I think it was 80, I want to say 1980, he took the 5th in the world.
Shit.
Yeah, so like he had legitimate wrestling skills. And even if you never saw him use them past maybe his first year, he had them. He knew how to do it. In the same way, Kenta Kobashi was a judo black belt. You Marufuji he actually trains pretty regularly with Kyokushin guys. Kenta, who's now obviously big in New Japan, he had a kickboxing background when he got brought into the Noah dojo. So a lot of these guys, well, actually it was all Japan dojo at the time, but a lot of these guys have in Japan, they still have legitimate backgrounds. They still have the proper training. Yeah. And that's why the style is so much more appealing to me personally, because the physicality of the technique. In the same way, when you watch Bloodsport, you're seeing physicality and technique, and that's the big difference maker. Because anyone, at the end of the day, anyone can make you laugh if they're funny, but making you scared, making you worry for another human being's well-being it's a different type of skill. Now, if you're smart, you know how to use, like, a good comedian can be a great dramatic actor because they understand how to get a reaction, and they expand on that. But we also all know those hacky comedians where, I mean, Jeff Dunham is never going to be an Academy Award winning actor.
Okay.
If he becomes one, I'll be there for it.
Oh yeah, no, I would have thought Dane Cook was dead and buried, and then he had a very small role in American Gods, and he wasn't bad. I mean, they weren't asking much of him. He was a philandering husband. It wasn't like they were really demanding him, to act his way out of the paper bag. But
you're like, you're good at this, right? Like method acting, I've done it. Philanderer, got it.
But with the kinds of things that are so predominant in Bloodsport, it's really the visceral experience of watching submission work and of watching, like, not necessarily just in Bloodsport, but in various places, like in Britain, they do joint manipulation stuff a lot. And watching that is kind of terrifying.
Yeah, I honestly thought it was real and I was freaking out.
Again, it's the level of violence. First of all, the level of violence a human body can take without crumbling is shocking. And
is.
we're not always aware of it, but things, you can get very violent. Like a person can get beat pretty savagely before dying.
My God.
Yeah, no, it's hard, but
I don't know if mine would.
Again, we're always surprised. It's what is it, Gene Wilder and what was it? Now you say I feel like Blazing Saddles.
Oh.
Man drinks like that, don't have no food, he's gonna die.
When?
Oh, yeah. Jake Roberts abused his body every way humanly possible, and the man just wouldn't die.
Yeah, he's still
out there.
Yeah, and again, it's like that's Scott Hall for years. Again, he abused his body, every human between wrestling and substance abuse, destroyed himself every way you could, and yet he's still alive. And it's a testament again to the sort of how resilient the human body is. But that also means that if you're willing to take a bit of pain, there's some very scary stuff you can do.
Sell the shit out of that.
Oh.
Is there value still in, I guess, like, because I mean the WWE does a thing which is almost not professional wrestling, like like they have a house style, and part of the reason why because we used to do WWE, we switched over to AEW after shit got real bad over there, but like I was it's been a long time coming, but like in AEW, I always felt like, oh yeah, like these are people who get to be themselves to a certain extent, get to explore, like you see different stuff, but WWE is still making a crap ton of money, so like are they doing something worthwhile, or is it just a money-making venture now? I don't know. Well,
yeah, you have to understand WWE at this point in the game is basically a content production company. They're not really a wrestling company.
Yeah, I can.
The majority of their income is related to TV rights internationally and nationally. I mean, they made, what was it, $1 billion from Fox, and they're getting like another $1 billion from for their streaming platform being bought by, I think it's Peacock or CBS.
Yeah.
Right. Forgot about that.
But it's basically what they've been doing for the last probably decade. It's just they produce content.
Mm-hmm.
It's I didn't even know this because I had this conversation with one of the people that works for BN Sports where MLW airs. Universally, live programming for whatever reason does better in ratings than pre-taped.
Sure.
I don't know why. It's not like the outcome's going to change whether you see it live or pre-taped. So I don't see the appeal. But apparently, companies, they were more likely to advertise with you. You're going to get more ad revenue if your show's live. And there's so little live television nowadays, not even just because of COVID, but even before that, from a production standpoint, it's just there's so much more money in a 3-camera shoot with a proper, sets and all that stuff, that there's no reason to go live. I mean, beyond Saturday Night Live and pro wrestling, I really can't think of another live TV show, maybe like outside of like maybe a news program or something like that.
Yeah, just sports. That's it.
Yeah.
So being able to offer an entertainment program that's live is different, and that's how WWE makes their money. They don't. Jimmy Jacobs actually famously said it's really hard to write 3 hours of TV a week. And my response was, well, let's be honest, Jimmy, it's not 3 hours, it's 2 hours and 15 minutes. 45 minutes commercials. Let's start with a real number. Secondly, it's not the show it's not hard to write 2 hours. I could write 2 hours right now. It might not be good, but I could do it. The issue is when you have a single person who can tell you this is crap, I don't want to do it, right up until showtime, to where you're having to rewrite it while the show's airing.
Yeah.
That's the real issue. That's what's difficult. It's not difficult to write 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 15 minutes of content. It's difficult to get it 2 hours, 15 minutes approved. That's the challenge. How do you have a roster of almost 300 people and you can't fill 3 hours?
Yeah. Very good point. Very good point.
I mean, if you just gave everyone a minute to talk, you'd have more than enough.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even need to do any matches. You could say, you guys, everyone has 1 minute to talk tonight.
It'll be a roast.
Yeah, the Miz will still take 15 minutes. I tease him about it. I'm sure he doesn't know that, but I do tease him about it, that we legitimately lost match time every time we were on TV because he was before us with a promo. and universally he went over.
Oh, God.
And there was always that thought in the back of my head of like, he's not doing his job well. He's failing to hit his time. Why are we getting punished? Like, you're not gonna. Why not just cut his promo time?
Something else that feels like it has a direct corollary to the world of comedy.
100%,
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. So here's something I've been curious about with COVID and everything. Like after it initially hit and everyone's freaking out, wrestling picked up, and sometimes it didn't even miss a beat. And I always worried about the wrestlers, like, are they cool with this? Are they coming to terms with this? Do they, I don't know, like, how do you put yourself
Well,
out
I will
there?
say, so a few things on this. First of all, at Bloodsport specifically,
Mhm.
they had a great deal of precautions. Like I said, only 5 people were allowed in the room when they were filming. There was on-site testing as soon as you got there. You weren't allowed in the building until you were tested. You had to wear a mask anytime you weren't basically eating or drinking water actively.
Okay.
So they did all the, had the hand sanitizer out, everything. So it was all, taken care of.
Yeah.
Wrestling is my full-time job.
Right.
The same way someone works at Walmart or Costco, the same way someone works in an office building. It's my full-time job. This is the only way I make a living. I have a mortgage. You can see my office in here. It's not very well kept. This is my office. But for me, my thought was, I have 2 choices. I can try and get a normal job right now, but the issue is going to be, number one, I have no real work history for almost 8 years. Yeah, I started working for WWE in 2013. My last real job was December 2012. So I've got to try and get somebody to hire a guy from California who's living in Florida, who has no work history for 8 years, has no education beyond high school, has no references. So basically, if I wanted to work a real job, I'd be limited to what we've come to call essential labor, which basically means I would be
You're still
at
on the
risk
front
for
lines.
exposure.
Mhm.
Yeah, by being around, and I live in Florida, no less. So yeah,
Point.
so my thought was, I'm probably safer on a plane for 2 hours flying to an event and being in front of even an audience for 10, 15 minutes and being able to being able to wear a mask and being able to take care of myself than I am if I try and work a 40-hour-a-week job at a grocery store in Florida.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I gotta say, I just appreciate 100% all the effort that it takes, and knowing you're possibly putting yourself out there at risk in any way at all. I do appreciate it, because like it's kept us going all year. This has been the highlight of our year.
And again, it's as much as I'm glad that people enjoy it, I hate to say it, at the end, it is my job. I don't get to have a say in that. I threw away any hope of having a real job a long time ago. So I have to deal with it regardless. If no one wanted to go to the I mean, a lot of people do get upset sometimes when they see shows running because they feel like and rightfully so, that there are a lot of potential issues being raised by it with COVID. And again, we're all in the same, we're all in the same situation, which is you have to work. If the government isn't going to provide adequate assistance, which the previous administration made clear they were not going to do at all, and this one's still kind of dangling like a carrot in front of a hungry donkey.
$1,400 carrot.
Yeah, one carrot.
One carrot, yes. It shows how disconnected people are from real life when they're like, oh, $1,400, that'll last you for 3 months.
God,
One mortgage payment for me. That won't even last me a month.
It's not even my rent. It's ridiculous.
How does the industry go forward after this? I feel like for me, like even watching a TV show or like a concert from 2015, like all those people, why are they so close together? Oh, this is gross. Does the industry change going forward as a result of this?
Realistically, no. There's certain things I think should be in place anyway. I do believe that you should have, anytime you book a venue, you need to have a shower on site. just because I've seen
Yeah.
how bad a stat. I mean,
That's fucking not a thing.
I thought that was a thing.
you would be shocked.
You can even
yeah.
get one of those camping showers. Those little bags.
WrestleMania at Camping World Stadium in Orlando, they had to bring in showers because they have none at the building.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
impossible.
Now we worked in a rodeo in Texarkana, and that building had a shower. The building they did WrestleMania at in Orlando did not.
Well,
Clowns.
cattle need to be kept clean.
Oh yeah, but Jimmy Rave, actually, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He used to wrestle for TNA as well, they were TNA back then, as well as for Ring of Honor. He actually recently lost his arm to a staph infection.
Oh.
Yeah. And yeah, no, it's rough. And it was one of those things where he got the staph infection. I don't even think it had anything to do with wrestling. I think it was actually just his normal job.
Yeah.
But, wrestlers were stupid. We're just like, oh, I'll be fine. And then he finally wound up having to go to the hospital, and they were like, yeah, we have to take your arm.
Fuck.
Yeah.
What a nightmare.
It is. But for a lot of guys, it's weirdly, like I said, they don't have a shower at a venue, which to me seems like day one stuff. Have a shower available so people can shower after their match.
So they don't get
I would bring
staph.
baby wipes with me to shows just in case.
Yeah.
Just wipe myself down afterwards.
That's a French shower.
Do you, a lot of the time, do you have to douse yourself in gasoline just to try to wash off?
Thankfully, no, but I have had some really uncomfortable flights. I've tried to do the if you're really lucky, a couple airports have the what is it? It's the adult assistant bathroom.
Ooh.
It's for if you have someone who's like in a wheelchair or special needs.
Yeah.
And you can lock that door and just basically take a sink shower. And I've absolutely had to do that repeatedly because it'll be like the first leg of my flight. I get there and I'm like, okay, I just need to do something because my skin's on fire, and having to take the shower in the sink, and then yeah.
Goodness gracious. Well, it seems to me like there are a lot of wrestling hotbeds in the world that are further along as far as these issues go than in the US we have been, that like in places like Japan and elsewhere, they've kind of been through the experience of adapting to what a pandemic does.
Well, because the Japanese tend to actually pay attention to the rules and the science. I mean, the people will point to America and say, "Oh, look, lockdowns don't work." It's like, yeah, they don't work if you don't listen to them. If you don't abide by them. I was in because I live in Orlando, and I remember talking to a clerk in the grocery store, and they said there were people coming in 3 and 4 times in a day because the same people, because they just wanted something to do.
Yeah, I did a little bit of that.
Yeah, but that's. I was talking to Barnett about it. This completely unrelated, but I made the point about how you'll get if you get a bottle of Advil of ibuprofen, it'll tell you I think 1,200 is the maximum amount they want you to take in a day. But a doctor will prescribe up to 2,400 milligrams a day. And my thought is, if I tell you the line is 2,400, you'll go over that, and then you'll be in the bad place. But if I tell you it's 1,200, if you go over to 1,800, you still got some wiggle room. You're still safe.
Yeah. It's like telling your friend to meet you 5 minutes early because you know they're always 5 minutes late.
Exactly. And I think that's the issue with because legitimately we could have probably knocked COVID out early if we had just done a hard 3-week lockdown where everyone, like, no grocery stores, nothing is open, like emergency services, that's it. If you are a police, fire, EMT, you're the only people working. That's it. And we could have probably gotten it down significantly in 3 weeks, because in that 3 weeks, everyone who was going to get sick would know they were sick.
Yeah.
And everyone who was clear of those people would be able to, again, at least know if they've been around somebody or just not be around anyone.
Yeah, it certainly seemed that way.
Yeah. Instead, we did the opposite, and we're having parties and
I was
pretending that nothing was wrong.
reading about the Spanish flu, and it occurred to me that it's not the science that is the problem. Like that, it didn't wasn't so deadly back then because they didn't know shit. It's because people are people, and everything I read about people where they were doing exactly the same thing as they are now. I'm like, oh yeah, we can't fix that because it's human nature. You just gotta
Travel.
deal with it.
It's too easy to travel now.
Again, there's a weird, very strange anime series called High School of the Dead.
A strange one, you say.
It's, how can I put this? Think of a very serious zombie drama that has a lot of boobs
Okay.
for no reason, and almost so over the top with it that it has to be for comedy.
Are we saying
Because
zombie
no one
boobs?
could have done. Oh no! I'm talking about like one of the main characters is the school nurse, and she is just a cartoonishly blonde hair, blue eyed, quadruple F cup breasted woman whose
Super
boobs are
perky.
literally whose boobs are used as a tripod for a rifle one time.
Oh my.
Right.
Well,
All right.
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous.
that's very, yeah, that's practical.
Really useful.
But there's a point they make in this series. I had to tell you that to make this point. That with most viruses, like with the Black Plague, the reason the Black Plague ultimately stopped moving was because so many people died it couldn't travel.
Right.
That's what, the death was what stopped it. It was, there was no one traveling. The rodents weren't able to feed on anyone and travel with the fleet, like nothing. Everyone stopped moving. So the virus couldn't move. So you either died or you survived. It was
like,
one of the two.
Like in Futurama,
like
where
Ebola.
Zap Brannigan defeats the Killbots because he knows they have a kill limit.
He just sends wave after wave of people there. You have a problem, he'll send wave after wave of soldiers through it. It's
Do you get to what is your it seems like there's not just like an overlap of wrestling and comedy, but of wrestling and geekdom. Is there have you had
Yes.
a lot of genre?
no cool person likes wrestling. No one cool likes pro wrestling. That's just a fact. Particularly generationally speaking, a lot of the people that survive I guess you'd call it wrestling's bar mitzvah, because around the time you turn 12 or 13, you either hate wrestling or you plunge headlong into it. Those are your choices. And I just feel like, did my audio drop out or?
Nope.
Oh no, I hear you.
I
Yeah.
hear you.
It got quiet and I was like, oh.
No.
But,
I was actually
I was-
thinking about it because I was like,
Yeah.
where was I on that purpose?
No, I know. I was thinking about like that very moment, probably about that time that I was watching the wrestling that was on TV, and one of the factors that took me away for a long time was just Dad making fun of me for watching wrestling. And I was like, I don't like getting bullied by my dad.
and that's what happens with a lot of people is that for me, it was my older brother. We used to watch wrestling together. That was our thing. When he turned 12 or 13 and he stopped watching, I stopped watching for a while too. The thing that actually brought me back, interestingly enough, was Ken Shamrock.
Dear
You guys
God.
ready?
Oh goodness.
That was really funny.
Yep.
It's an omen.
But Shamrock was what brought me back to pro wrestling because I was a big UFC fan at the time. So when I started seeing him on Raw and the Saturday Sunday shows, like the highlights, I was like, oh man, I got to start watching this stuff again.
Well, that was a huge phenomenon. I'm sure that happened for a lot of people.
Oh yeah. And the weirdest part of Shamrock is still people don't realize he wrestled before he ever did MMA.
I don't know if I did know that.
Like professional wrestle?
Yeah. He wrestled in the Mid-Atlantic Territory under the name The Wrestling Machine Vince Torelli.
What?
Dang.
That was where he eventually wound up. So what wound up happening was Yoshiaki Fujiwara was friends with the Malenkos because Carl Gotch was Dean and Joe Malenko, one of their coaches. But it was Boris and Carl were the ones that trained the Malenko brothers, as well as a lot of the Japanese wrestlers. So when Fujiwara started Fujiwara Gumi, he basically said, send me guys who know how to really wrestle. And because Ken had an actual wrestling background, they gave him the hookup and got him in there. So you can watch like these 1990, 1991 matches with Ken Shamrock and Fujiwara Gumi, like before Pancrase, where his background was as a Greco-Roman, I think, guy and a pro wrestler. And then he slowly learned more MMA. He learned jiu-jitsu, he learned catch wrestling, he learned kickboxing, he learned all that working in Fujiwara Gumi, and then going over to Pancrase, because that's where Minoru Suzuki and Masakatsu Funaki came from, was Fujiwara Gumi, and they were the guys who started Pancrase. So the Shamrock literally went from working to shooting to working, back to shooting, back to working. And people talk about Big Show making all these turns. No, Shamrock, he's turned way more.
It seems like at some point you'd be afraid that you might forget like what the one you're doing at the moment is and whether you should go all the way or not.
Oh, I did a match with him. A few years ago, it was a 3-way tag. It was him and Tom Lawler against me and Eddie Kingston against the besties in the world, who are a tag team from the Midwest.
My God.
I gotta
love to see that.
It's for it was I can't remember what it was called. It was just like this event they did in Atlanta during the Super Bowl weekend. I don't know what the idea was, but it was a thing. And the best part of it was the besties were super excited, and they have this big like, hey, we've got this great idea, da 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 da. I'll do a backflip, and then you can catch me in the ankle lock. And Ken looks at him and just goes, yeah, I'm not going to remember all that. So how about punch, belly to belly, clothesline, ankle lock. And you could see their hearts just drop. It was like they got told there was no Santa Claus and they were at the same time.
Being that we primarily are now covering AEW. You mentioned one of the people that we have been geeking out over the most, which is Eddie Kingston. What is it like working with him?
Oh, Eddie's great. Eddie's whole thing is he likes to antagonize. He'll find the guy who's easily wound up and he likes to wind him up. Not in a mean way, but in whatever. Oh yeah, whatever the thing is. Also, Eddie's my favorite person to see at the airport because it looks like DMX. And no, literally, he'll be in the airport, 5:30 in the morning, unlaced Timbs, sweatpants, jersey, hoodie, hat. Being Eddie.
Well, I'm glad he's committed to the jersey 24/7.
Oh yeah, no, he does not. No, he lives it.
But
sorry.
Oh no, I just like he's just like we're all just like such big fans of that whole vibe and of his like promo like cutting prowess. So it's always cool to get to see him do his thing.
I mean, he's from the Bronx. If he's got one thing, he's got a mouth, you know.
You mentioned Carl Gotch. I know that's how you took your name in respect for that guy, but I also see you sometimes billed as Grimm, which I know you took after you left WWE. So which do you prefer? Because I love both.
I have no real preference. I usually just leave it up to the promoter. A lot of it was because at the time, so unbeknownst to me, WWE actually let my the trademark on my name lapse about 2 months after I was released.
Okay.
Which I was like, wow, they really didn't care. They absolutely were like, yeah, we're never getting this guy back. We do not need to spend the $400 every 8 years to have the name. So what wound up happening was I used the name Grimm because at the time that was one of the names I pitched. That's where Simon came from. Was Simon Grimm was a name I pitched in developmental. And they basically were like, well, they want you to use Gotch and any one of these first names. And I just went, how about Simon? And they went, okay, Simon Gotch, sounds good. So when I got released, that was the first one that popped in my head. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't know there was a guy who did like a internet show called Grimm's Toy Show.
I didn't know that either.
And he spelt his with one M, like the word that is very grim, and I spelt mine with 2, like the Brothers Grimm, because that was where I got it from. And so initially, it was such a mistake, not because I regretted it, but because every 12-year-old who watched this guy's YouTube channel, oh, you're stealing his name. It's like, I don't know who the fuck this guy is. I wound up meeting him at a signing, and he was very polite. So I was like, I had no issue with the guy. I didn't know him. But it was just, it was one of those ones where I'm just like, you think you've thought something through.
You Google it once. Come on.
The internet will find a way to mess it up.
Oh, yeah. There years ago, Howard Stern produced a show on FX called Son of the Beach it was supposed to be a spoof of Baywatch. And there was a joke that one of the guys, one of the lifeguards was German, And he was so horrified by the opinion of Germans in America that he was going to try and do some nice things to help people like Germans more. So he wanted to make a camp for children with ADD, a camp to help them concentrate.
Okay,
All
very
right.
good.
You see where the joke is going. So
It's like the South Park AIDS joke.
exactly. I just want. How did we know? How could we have not known that Jared would wind up doing something way worse?
Oh my God, right? Every time I hear those, like a show like The Simpsons or Futurama or something like this, not Futurama, it was always The Simpsons, mention just little jokes about Jared just being a big guy who got small. It's like, no, how we're in such different worlds now. Terrible, terrible worlds.
This is what you got to vet your people. That's always the big thing. Always.
Don't let them set up a children's charity without researching that.
Oh boy.
Now, again, you would think, but there's the it's always that assumption of what were the odds, like that was going to be a thing.
Yeah,
You know,
that's true.
You don't want to think that's a possibility.
Well,
When
it's
you
like
step outside.
it's like whatever that rule is of the internet that every comment thread will eventually come around to Nazism or mention Hitler or something like that. I forget what it is.
Oh yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, what was it? The when Paige, Becky Lynch, and Charlotte first were all together on Raw, they gave them the nickname the Submission Sorority, and they apparently hadn't Googled it and found out it was an adult website.
I don't. Well, I can hardly imagine what that could also be alluding to. That's like the 30 Rock Lemon Party thing. Or something.
Yeah. People legitimately don't know this stuff sometimes, and you would think, well, just give it a Google. How hard is it? And it's not that it's hard. It's that if you're not looking for that specifically, you might not think to look for it.
That's true.
Because, again, if I'm not looking for Grimm's Toy Show, I'm not going to find that there's a guy in New Jersey who does his show on YouTube and uses the name Grimm, particularly if he spells it differently. So it's not going to come up for me.
He spells
But
it like
in the same-
grimace, like the purple blob.
You know, weirdly, Grimace did not grimace. He did not make a face that
Never
you would
did.
describe as a grimace.
No.
He was smiling.
He was a
He
happy
was
guy.
lovely.
It was ironic.
He was
Ah,
the Snuffleupagus
yeah.
of McDonald's.
So he didn't exist.
Well, technically Snuffleupagus existed, but at first they all thought he was imaginary.
Oh, yeah, he was Big Bird's imaginary friend, which has got to mess with you because you're a 7-foot tall anthropomorphic bird. But that guy's imaginary. That guy's not real.
No.
Well, that's the one of the things that is like almost infuriating about like the Godzilla movies is that from movie to movie, their capacity to be shocked by the appearance of a monster is never ending. They no critical mass of monsters to date like steals them for the possibility of one more.
I feel like after 5, that's my thought. I feel like realistically, once there have been 5 of them, you're going to be like, okay, it's not that shocking anymore.
They're like, it's either half a dozen or baker's dozen at this point.
Look,
There's
Look,
going to be some more.
don't get me wrong. I don't think we should be complacent about the threat this one poses. However, on an emotional level,
No joke. That is how people quantify things, though. We when I was at Harley Race's school for a few years, Bob Backlund actually came in and we did a workout with him. And Bob at the time was 63 years old. And he ran us through a bunch of push-ups, sit-ups, and squats out in the gravel in like a Missouri summer.
Oh my God.
Not a whole lot of fun. But when we're doing squats, Bob he's the only guy I've ever seen do this. He would count, but when you're counting in your head, it's like, if you
so
hear
much faster.
51,
Yeah.
you're going to 100. If you hear 101, you're probably doing 200. Like that's how you quantify it. You're like, okay, I know that's the next big number. That's probably what we're doing. Bob counted like 133, stopped counting. We're still squatting, and then he starts over at 1.
psychologically breaking you down.
Oh yeah, and then he'd get to like 37 or 38 and stop counting, and he'd like, come on guys, I'm 63 years old. You can't keep up with me.
Oh,
Then we'd Then he'd start over again. And it wasn't like he was doing it for any real reason, but it was like we couldn't figure out. It was true muscle confusion. We did not know how many we were doing.
Damn.
I think we wound up doing something like 373 or some random amalgam of numbers.
Lord.
Oh my, that would drive me out of my mind.
Oh yeah, no, not hearing a complete. Again, if you hear 300, you at least feel like you've accomplished something. If it keeps
Yeah.
stopping randomly, it really messes with you.
God.
God, how do your legs even move after that?
Is there a I've heard of like sort of a generational difference, and I feel like there's this thing where like there's a generation of wrestlers who were fans, as opposed to the old school kayfabe, like the Bob Backlunds who are making you do all these squats. Like, is there that difference that you perceive, or is it just all kinds of people?
So let me put a few things in perspective. Okay. So my mom was born in 1950. She was born in New York. She was raised in Los Angeles. And she has memories as a child, 5, 6 years old, stopping in front of whatever it was, Sears, Roebuck, or wherever they had the TVs in the window and watching Gorgeous George on TV.
Wow.
Yeah. So the thing with that, with what you have to remember is that when wrestling was huge on TV when it first started, it was one of the first nationally recognized programs that you saw. And that was the first generation of kids, though, that were growing up watching pro wrestling. Before that, everyone who's in the industry had been an amateur wrestler, had been a catch wrestler, had been a carnival wrestler. It was some form of that. When wrestling went on television, that was the first time you had people who were fans, active fans of a specific TV product wrestling that were, because again, it was a lot of barnstorming. It was a lot of territories.
Yeah.
This was the first time it was like, wow, I know who Gorgeous George is. That's a celebrity. He was the first athlete to make $1 million. And that was in like 1950s dollars.
Fuck.
Yeah.
Like
people don't realize he was wealthy. That's why he died at like 60. That's why he died at like 55, But when you have that happen, you have that first generation of guys who all had a legitimate wrestling background and trained like athletes. As archaic as it may have been, they were training like athletes. And then you have the next generation of guys coming in who grew up watching wrestling.
Yeah.
Now the guys that are watching the wrestlers are watching the guys who grew up watching wrestling. And in many cases, they're just copying things they've seen on TV.
Right.
Then the next generation coming in after that has been watching guys who've been watching guys who were watching wrestling. Then the generation after that's watching guys who are watching guys who are watching guys who are watching wrestling. So it gets diluted more and more with time. And it's not so much necessarily a hard generational difference. Bob Backlund is a freak athlete. Where he went to college, I think he went to the University of Minnesota. They used to have 3 lifting stations. It was a bench press, a deadlift, and a squat. It was rebar cemented into the ground. And the whole idea was to see how hard you were willing to pull. Most guys would work it. They wouldn't really pull that hard because they knew they weren't going to pull it. Bob pulled the deadlift out of the ground.
No fucking way.
Bob is a beast. I saw him at 63 years old deadlift a 200-pound man with one arm like he was nothing.
God.
All right.
Bob Backlund legitimately is a freak athlete by all accounts. That guy does not get tired.
Good.
So Bob is very different than a guy like, say, the Crusher or Bronco Nagurski or a lot of guys like that. Guys like Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen were football players. Guys like, even Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, both football players. You had guys who were amateur wrestlers. Flair was also an amateur wrestler. You had guys who were athletes in various sports. Like, it could be anything. Hockey, swimming, gymnastics. Tom McGee, the guy who had the lost match for years with Bret Hart that everyone wanted to see. He was a legitimate, borderline Olympian in Canada for powerlifting and gymnastics.
Oh, shit.
He just wasn't a good pro wrestler. He should have been. He just did not have any ability at it. Also, he looks eerily like Kenny Omega, and he's also from Ottawa.
That's just how they grow him up there.
And he's just old enough to be his father. So for years I've been Tom McGee is Kenny Omega. And he has so much shame over his. That's why he does what he does, because he has so much shame over his father that he's like, I have to prove I'm the best because I don't want people to associate with me with my dad.
Oh my god.
Like on his deathbed, Kenny Omega's going to admit Tommy G's his dad.
Looking forward to that. Well, so what is the Bloodsport experience like of well, I guess like any promotion you're at, you're gonna have guys coming from a lot of different disciplines. But maybe it's one where more guys are coming from MMA, or I don't know. What is that like?
It varies person to person. You have someone like Cal Jack. Cal actually, fun fact, his dad, Dave, actually holds victories over both Dr. Death, Steve Williams, and Dan Severn in amateur wrestling competition. So his dad was a badass. Cal was born with a club foot, was told he would never be an athlete, and his dad basically said, fuck that. And he was a nationally ranked heavyweight for Oregon State. And
Damn.
so Cal's just he's basically a shaved gorilla. He looks like a mountain man. He's got a permanently broken nose. He has the most cauliflowered ears I've ever seen on a human being.
Oh wow.
You have someone like Tom Lawler, who was again, a little bit of an amateur background, but he also BJJ black belt, kickboxing, fought in the UFC. You have someone like Royce Isaacs, who a lot of people don't know, actually has a amateur background and a catch background because he's trained with Barnett a bunch. Dickinson had a karate background. I have a Kempo background. Like a lot of the guys have different martial arts backgrounds. Guy like JR Kratos, who again, he does have some amateur background and some catch training, but he's also just a friggin' brawler. He's just a big, strong dude.
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah, no, and again, a lot of the time in pro wrestling, these skills sort of fall to the wayside because a lot of guys don't focus on them. But Bloodsport gives a lot of people who are athletes. I mean, again, Cal is a legitimate athlete. That guy is just. I have tried to corral him before on the bar. There's a street in Orlando. I can't remember the name because it's been a long time since I've been out. But there's a street in Orlando downtown where they shut down both sides of it, and all these bars open up and people can just sort of walk between them.
Sort of like Bourbon Street.
Kind of, but more like Bourbon Street if we're only 30 yards long.
That's
and
all the
no
Bourbon
cars
Street.
can drive down.
Right.
Street.
But I've tried to corral him before when he was in NXT, and you can't do it. He will take off like a madman. He tried to sleep in a stairway once, a garage stairway.
That's so wild to think that he's like Teddy Roosevelt or something like that, right? Like somebody who like started out like infirm and just was like, I'm just gonna be strong. That's just all there is to it.
Teddy, the first mixed martial artist in the U.S. He had an honorary black belt in, I think, judo and jiu-jitsu.
Did he?
Oh yeah, he actually
That's
had
so
mats.
cool.
He had wrestling mats in the basement of the White House, and he would randomly challenge people. He once, I think it was like the Prime Minister of Sweden. He just like completely threw hard just to amuse like the people that were there.
Oh my god.
Well, I think the question we have to ask ourselves is if Abraham Lincoln, who was a confirmed wrestling champion, ever worked one.
Oh no, he did. He wrestled bears.
That's true.
Lincoln wrestled a bear, and not the way that Log Cabin Lincoln say he did. Oh, he did that too.
It's all fun wrestling.
It is.
Thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time and your knowledge.
Super
It's been really a delight.
No problem. This is what they pay me the median bucks for, not the big bucks. Just to keep a roof over my head.
If you can cover your mortgage, man, that's all I ever asked.